On Christmas Day, my parents said we couldn't afford gifts for your kids this year. Then I watched my sister's children open iPads and designer shoes. Dad laughed. You know times are hard. I packed up our coats, left, and the next morning I posted something that made every relative call me within minutes. Hi, my name is Jessica Miller. I am 34 years old and live in Portland, Oregon, with my two young children. Noah is 10, and Grace is only 7. As a single mother, I work full-time at an independent bookstore downtown, a place where no one is wealthy but everyone loves words and the quiet comfort they bring. The job doesn't provide much money, but it gives me a sense of peace in the middle of life's chaos. I love the smell of fresh paper, the simple joy of arranging books on the shelves, and the moments when customers share the stories they are searching for. For me, it's never just about selling books. It's a way of nurturing the soul while still struggling to raise my kids. Noah and Grace understand our situation better than most children their age. They never demand expensive things like their classmates do. Noah is obsessed with adventure novels and often sits quietly in a corner of the shop during my evening shifts, clutching an old, worn book. Grace loves to draw, using stubby colored pencils to fill blank pages with her own imagined worlds. Watching them makes me both proud and heartbroken because they have learned sacrifice and patience far earlier than any child should. I tell myself every day that as long as they have a roof over their heads and the love I give them, then the rest, the material things we lack, can always be endured. My parents live in Seattle, just a few hours' drive from Portland, but it feels like a completely different world. They own a spacious house in a quiet neighborhood, with a lush backyard and neighbors who are doctors, lawyers, and business owners. My younger sister, Lauren, 32, has long been the pride of the family. She married a wealthy businessman, lives in a big house, drives luxury cars, and has 2 children who are always dressed in the latest clothes and carrying the newest tech toys. Meanwhile, I have always felt like a shadow at the edge of their lives. Since we were little, my parents called Lauren their golden one and called me the independent child, a pretty way of saying I was left to fend for myself. I grew used to being compared, but after becoming a mother, I felt the injustice even more deeply, because every time Noah and Grace were overlooked inside their grandparents' house, my heart ached. A week before Christmas, I received a text from my mother. It was short and clipped. No gifts for you or the kids this year. Times are hard. I stared at the screen, my heart tightening. I knew my parents were never truly struggling. Their big house was always stocked with food, their cars had been replaced less than 2 years ago, and their vacations to Florida or Hawaii were still regular events. Hard times was just an excuse. What they were really telling me was that Noah and Grace didn't deserve to be prioritized, that all their care and attention belonged to Lauren and her picture-perfect family. I had grown used to it, but reading that message still left a lump in my throat. That night, I sat on the bed watching my children scribble letters to Santa Claus. Noah wrote only one line. I wish Santa would make my mom happy. Grace, with her uneven handwriting, wrote, I want Mom to have more money so she won't be tired anymore. I turned away to hide the tears in my eyes. I didn't know how to explain anything to them, so I just told them. Whether there are gifts or not, the most important thing is that we get to see your grandparents. To have dinner together, to look at the tree glowing with lights, that itself is already a blessing. I tried to say it with a cheerful voice, but inside me a crack was widening. On Christmas Day, I dressed the children in the cleanest clothes they owned. Noah's green sweater was old but still warm. Grace's red dress was a little too short, yet she still twirled in front of the mirror, laughing with delight. I tied her hair, kissed my son on the cheek, and then looked at myself in the mirror. Strands of gray had begun to show in my hair, and the fine lines at the corners of my eyes seemed deeper, but I brushed on a little lipstick to look less worn. I wanted my children to feel that Christmas was about joy, not comparison. On the drive from Portland to Seattle, heavy snow blanketed the trees lining the road. Noah sat in the back seat clutching his favorite book, occasionally looking up to ask if we were almost there. Grace hummed a Christmas song she had learned at school, her small, clear voice softening the weight in the car. I forced a smile, but inside me was only one fear. How to protect my children from feeling abandoned once again. I knew the house we were heading toward, the place where glowing lights and glittering gifts were reserved for one side of the family, while we were always left standing outside. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, took a deep breath, and promised myself that this time I would keep my head high. I had sworn that no matter how cold my parents were, I would not let Noah and Grace see their mother break. And so, our little car pushed through the snowstorm, inching closer to the house where injustice was always waiting to show itself. When we stepped through the grand front door, the scent of cinnamon and gingerbread drifted from the kitchen, mingling with Christmas music playing through the Bose speakers in the living room. The glow from a nearly 10-foot tree reflected on the polished floor. Red and silver ornaments hung from its branches, tinsel sparkled in every corner, but what stunned me was not the extravagant decorations. It was the mountain of gifts piled beneath the tree. I froze with my hand still resting on Grace's back, unable to believe my eyes. Box after box wrapped in shimmering paper stamped with logos: Apple, Nike, Gucci. I didn't need to open them to know what was inside: brand new iPads, designer sneakers, expensive dresses. And every single tag bore the names of my sister Lauren's children. The sight felt like an invisible slap, especially after the message I had received just days earlier. Times are hard, no gifts for you or the kids. Lauren walked out from the kitchen in a pristine white knit dress that hugged her figure, her face glowing as if the entire evening had been staged for her to shine. Beside her stood her husband in a Ralph Lauren sweater, holding a glass of red wine. Their two children, a blonde little girl with a red ribbon in her hair and a boy in a plaid shirt, ran excitedly around the Christmas tree, their voices chirping, "Mom, is this an iPad? Did Grandma and Grandpa get this for us?" Lauren smiled triumphantly, speaking loud enough for the entire living room to hear. "Yes, this year Grandma and Grandpa were very generous. My daughter got a Gucci dress, and my son has limited edition Nike sneakers. You kids are so lucky." She glanced in my direction, her look seemingly casual but carrying a sharp reminder of the gulf between us. Noah and Grace pressed close to my side, their wide eyes fixed on the glittering boxes under the tree. Grace clutched my hand tightly, her gaze silently asking why Grandma's tree overflowed with gifts but none had their names. Noah stayed quiet, his face trying to remain composed, but I could see him swallowing down disappointment. I bent close and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart. As long as we have each other, that's enough." Noah nodded, but his eyes still wandered back to the pile of gifts he knew he would never touch. My father walked out from the living room, a beer in his hand, laughing heartily as if this were the most successful party of the year. He looked at me, patted my shoulder, and said casually, "Jess, don't be upset. Times are tough, you have to understand." His words were light, dismissive, as if they could sweep away the injustice laid out so plainly before us. I pressed my lips tightly together, forcing a stiff smile, but inside me my blood boiled. Tough times? Tough times, yet there are iPads, Gucci dresses, and Nike sneakers for my sister's kids? Tough times, yet this house glows with lights, the table is overflowing with turkey, ham, pie, and wine? Tough times only apply to me and my children, is that it? At dinner, everything unfolded like a staged play. Lauren spoke about their upcoming ski trip to Aspen that her husband had just booked, and bragged about plans to renovate the kitchen with high-end appliances imported from Italy. My parents listened intently, nodding along as though every word she said was gold. I stayed silent, cutting turkey for Grace, pouring Noah another glass of orange juice. My children ate quietly, never interrupting the grown-up conversation. From time to time, Grace glanced at the pile of gifts under the tree before lowering her eyes back to her plate. My heart felt like it was being crushed, filled with shame that I couldn't give them what they so clearly deserved. As the meal drew to a close, Lauren raised her glass, smiling brightly as she thanked our parents for always loving and supporting her family. The table erupted in applause, laughter echoing in my ears. I looked at Noah and Grace, their small faces lost in the middle of all the shallow noise. And in that moment, I knew it was time for us to leave. I stood up, gently pushing my chair back, then bent down to help Grace slip on her coat and adjust Noah's scarf. "Let's go home," I whispered. Noah only nodded, while Grace softly asked, "Mom, aren't we opening presents?" I bit my lip, my heart aching, and pulled her into my arms instead of giving an answer. Lauren laughed when she saw us getting ready to leave, her voice dripping with mockery. "So early? Don't your kids want to stay and play? Or do you have to get back to that tiny little bookstore of yours?" Her laughter rang through the air, blending with the sound of clinking glasses in the living room, and I felt my face burn. I turned back, forcing a thin smile. "I think it's better if we go." Holding my children's hands, I walked away under the half-mocking, half-indifferent eyes of the room. No one stopped us. Not a single Merry Christmas was offered to the three of us. Only the roar of laughter behind us, drowning out even the howling wind outside. When the heavy door slammed shut at our backs, it felt as though we had stepped out of a world that would never have space for us. The snow was falling harder now, covering the walkway in white. I squeezed Noah and Grace's hands tightly and whispered, "We'll be okay, I promise." And in that moment, on a Christmas night glittering with lights yet frozen in love, I knew there were wounds that could no longer remain silent. The car pushed forward through the snow, wipers moving rhythmically across the windshield, but nothing could clear the heaviness inside me. In the back, Noah and Grace sat in silence. I glanced into the rearview mirror and saw Noah staring out the window, his eyes more distant than usual. Then he leaned forward slightly, his voice so small it was almost lost in the sound of the wind outside. "Mom, I don't need an iPad, I just need you." My son's innocent words cut straight into my heart like a blade. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my throat constricting as I fought back tears. Grace looked up at her brother, then reached over and wrapped her arms tightly around me from the back seat. In that moment, I felt both the deepest pain and the unshakable truth that my children were the only strength keeping me standing. But at the same time, his words pulled me back into my own childhood, the years when I always had to fend for myself while Lauren was cherished like a princess. I remembered so clearly that by the time I was only 5 or 6, I already knew how to prepare my own breakfast, tie my own shoelaces, and clean up my toys without being told. My mother often said to others, "Jessica is so mature, she doesn't need anyone to remind her." Back then, I naively thought it was a compliment, but in reality it meant I never received the care a child should have. Lauren, on the other hand, was always protected. The moment she sniffled, both my parents would rush over to wipe her nose, comfort her, and say, "Lauren is still little, she needs more love." I grew up with the constant feeling that I was extra, expected to behave, to know my place, and never to ask for more. My 13th birthday is one of the memories I will never forget. That day, my mother bought a small cake from a bakery near our house, stuck a few candles in it, and we sat down to eat it quickly after dinner. There were no gifts, no friends invited, nothing special except a rushed, "Happy birthday." I told myself at least I had a cake. But just a week later, when Lauren turned 11, my parents threw her a big party at an upscale restaurant. There were balloons, a live band, even a clown performing tricks. Her friends filled the room, and the pile of gifts in the corner grew higher and higher. I sat at the table, forcing a smile, but inside it felt like ice water had been poured over me. When Lauren unwrapped her presents and proudly showed off a sparkling silver bracelet, it hit me that my birthday had been treated as an obligation, while hers was a true family celebration. During my high school years, I continued to take care of myself. I worked part-time at the library, saving every dollar to buy textbooks and a warm winter coat. Meanwhile, Lauren never had to think twice about money. Whatever she wanted, my parents found a way to get it for her. I still remember one time when I needed new sneakers to join the school basketball team. When I asked, my mother said, "Just use your old pair, we can't afford extras." Yet only days later, Lauren was given brand new designer ballet shoes for her dance class. I looked down at my own worn, torn sneakers and bit my lip. Situations like that repeated so often that they stopped surprising me. What remained was a quiet wound that never healed. When it came time for college, my dream was to study literature. But my parents told me outright that they couldn't afford to help. I had to rely on scholarships and juggle multiple jobs waiting tables, tutoring, even cleaning dormitories. Meanwhile, Lauren chose to study art in New York, a notoriously expensive path. And suddenly, my parents found thousands of dollars to send her, covering tuition and even a comfortable apartment rental. I understood then that, in their eyes, my dream wasn't worth investing in, while Lauren's dream had to be supported at any cost. I swallowed my resentment over and over, telling myself that if I stayed strong, I would prove my worth on my own. But as I grew older, I realized the truth. The problem was never my effort. It was the love in our family, which had been unevenly divided from the very beginning. All those memories played like a film in reverse as I drove through the freezing Christmas night. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let the kids see them. I had to be strong, at least in front of them. Yet later, when I tucked them into bed, watching Grace clutch her old stuffed bear and Noah burying himself in the pages of a worn-out book to escape his sadness, I couldn't hold back anymore. I sat down in the chair by the window, staring at the snow falling outside, and let the tears stream down my face. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lauren's mocking laughter, my father's dismissive words, the hesitant eyes of Noah and Grace, they all echoed in my mind. I realized that my whole life, I had stayed silent. I had endured favoritism and injustice, letting them become part of the air I breathed. But now, seeing my children forced to repeat that same pain, I knew I could not stay silent any longer. I opened my laptop, logged into Facebook, and began to write. Each word poured out of me like a flood that had been dammed up for years. I wrote about my mother's hard times text, about the iPads, Gucci dresses, and Nike shoes piled under the tree while my children didn't have a single small gift. I wrote about my 13th birthday with its tiny cake and compared it to Lauren's lavish party. I wrote about my college years, struggling to survive on my own, while my sister was provided with everything she wanted. I didn't write in anger, but with honesty, as if telling the world the truth I had hidden for far too long. I ended with the words, "I've stayed silent my whole life, but not this time." When I hit post, my whole body trembled. Part of me was afraid of the storm of backlash that might come. But another part, deep inside, felt a strange relief. As if, finally, I had found the courage to stand up not only for myself but for Noah and Grace. Outside, snow kept falling in a white blur. But inside, I knew another kind of storm was about to begin. The next morning, I woke up groggy after a nearly sleepless night. Winter light slipped weakly through the curtains, but the room felt anything but warm. I reached for my phone to check the time, and immediately my screen lit up with an avalanche of notifications. 45 missed calls. A voicemail box already full. Messenger and Facebook flashing with dozens of unread messages. My heart pounded, my palms grew damp with sweat. I knew I had lit the fuse to a bomb, but I never expected it to explode this big, this fast. My post, the long message I had typed through tears the night before, had spread through the entire Miller family. Not only cousins, but even distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years had read it. Someone shared it, then another shared it again, and now it no longer belonged to my small corner. In front of the whole extended family, the polished facade of my parents' perfect household had cracked wide open. I opened my post again, rereading every line as if to remind myself that everything I wrote was the truth. My parents said they couldn't afford gifts for my kids. But last night, I watched my niece and nephew unwrap iPads and designer shoes. I've stayed silent my whole life, but not this time. Those words, simple yet soaked in bitterness, left everyone stunned. Comments began to pour in. One aunt in California wrote publicly, "Jessica, you spoke the truth. Your parents have always favored Lauren. Everyone in the family knows it, but no one ever dared to say it out loud. It's time people finally see." Reading that, I trembled as tears streamed down my face. For perhaps the first time in my life, I realized I wasn't completely alone. A cousin of mine from Texas messaged me privately. Jess, I remember when we were kids, every time the family gathered, your parents only bragged about Lauren. We all noticed it, but no one spoke up. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. It felt as if the old wounds inside me were finally being acknowledged, no longer dismissed or treated as if they were just my imagination. But not everyone was supportive. Some relatives on my father's side, those closest to my parents, wrote words of reproach. You shouldn't shame the family on social media. Everyone shows a little favoritism sometimes, but exposing it this way only embarrasses your parents. I read those words and my heart raged. Embarrassment? What about me? I had lived my whole life under injustice, under cold, indifferent stares. Did that not count as shame, as loss? What astonished me most was how fast the truth spread. A college friend commented, Jess, I always knew you were strong. Now the whole world will see it. An old neighbor from Portland shared the post too, adding, this mother has endured far too much. Then I began to see even more familiar names from the church community where my parents regularly attended services. The Miller family had long been seen as a model of respectability in the eyes of neighbors, a stable, proper family with strong roots. My father often boasted about his speeches at the retirement council, always emphasizing fairness and responsibility. My mother was deeply involved in the church women's group, admired by many as the ideal mother. But in just one night, that image shook violently. I heard that very morning, in the church group chat, someone wrote, if what Jessica says is true, then Mrs. Miller is not as fair as she's always preached. I pictured my parents' faces now, as whispers began seeping into the social circles they valued so much. My father would surely be furious when former colleagues at the council meeting asked him outright, you talk so much about fairness, but what about inside your own home? My mother would no doubt feel humiliated when she walked into church and caught the scrutinizing looks of the other women. Everything they had worked so hard to preserve their reputation, their pride was unraveling into smoke with just a few clicks. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls stacked one after another. I knew my parents, and Lauren too, were trying to reach me, probably to shout, to demand I take the post down. Each time the screen lit up, I hesitated, but then I set it back down. I wasn't ready to hear more blame, not again. I needed to protect my calm, because this time, I refused to lose. Noah and Grace woke up and walked into the living room, seeing me sitting there in the glow of my phone. Grace rubbed her eyes and asked, Mom, why are so many people messaging you? I pulled her into my arms, whispering, it's okay, sweetheart. Everything will be fine. But deep down, I knew the storm had only just begun and it was about to sweep through everything in the Miller family. That afternoon, just as the pale winter sun disappeared, I heard pounding on the door like the beat of war drums. When I stepped into the living room, my heart sank. My parents stood on the porch, their faces flushed with anger, and Lauren was beside them, arms crossed, a smug smirk curling at her lips. I had known this moment would come sooner or later, yet my legs still trembled slightly. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and forced my voice to stay calm. Come in. My mother marched in first, her fur-trimmed coat still dusted with snow, her eyes blazing. She didn't wait to sit down before unleashing her fury. Do you have any idea what you've done, Jessica? You've disgraced our family. People will laugh, they'll gossip, and it's all because of you. My father followed, silent, but his clenched jaw and tightened fists showed how hard he was straining to contain his rage. Lauren strolled in behind them, casually placing her designer bag on the chair before crossing her legs, her eyes sweeping across my modest home with undisguised disdain. I swallowed hard, my heart racing, but I answered anyway. I only spoke the truth. I've stayed silent for too long. My mother glared at me. Truth? What truth? Everything you wrote has only dragged this family through the mud. Outsiders don't understand, and now they'll think the worst of us. I bit my lip, struggling to hold back my anger. Outsiders? What about right here inside this house, where injustice has lived year after year, and no one has ever dared to admit it? Lauren leaned back, her voice dripping with bitterness. You always think of yourself as the victim. Have you ever looked at yourself? If you were successful like me, if you earned more money, then your kids would have iPads too. Don't blame our parents, they just want to invest in someone who can bring them pride. My blood boiled. I burst into tears, but they were no longer the weak tears of defeat, they were tears pressed down for too many years. I looked straight at my sister. Lauren, I'm not jealous of you. I have never been jealous. I just will not accept my children being looked down on right in front of me when they have done nothing wrong. If you call that investment, then does that mean our parents' love comes with conditions? The room seemed to freeze. Noah and Grace peeked from the hallway, their eyes wide, watching their grandparents and their aunt. I knew they were scared, but I also knew today was the day they needed to see their mother stay silent no longer. My father finally erupted, his voice crashing like thunder. Jessica, if you don't delete that post immediately and apologize publicly, you will no longer be my daughter. I will disown you. Do you understand? He slammed his hand down on the table, making the glass of water tremble violently. I sat still for a moment, my heart seeming to stop. Those words, the harshest verdict from the man who raised me, were perhaps the most painful thing any child could hear. Yet a strange calm settled over me. Maybe it was because I had been living this moment my entire life. Today it was simply being spoken out loud. I stood up, wiped my tears, and said, my voice low but firm. Then consider today the day I step out of this family. I have nothing left to lose. The whole room froze. My mother's mouth fell open, as if she couldn't believe her daughter would dare to defy her. My father gripped the armrest of his chair, his face flushed red with fury. Lauren let out a bitter laugh and threw back a cutting remark. Good luck, Jess. Without this family, you'll never get far. And, I looked her straight in the eyes, a strange lightness washing over me. This family was never really there for me, and I've already gone far without them. Then I turned to my children and opened my arms to hold them close. In their small embrace, I found my strength. No one said another word. My parents, seething with anger, rose to their feet. My mother turned her face away to hide her tears, while my father stormed out the door without looking back. Lauren slowly slung her designer bag over her shoulder, gave me one last glance, half pity, half contempt, and whispered, You'll regret this. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving behind a heavy silence in my small home. I sank into the chair, clutching my children tightly, my whole body trembling. Yet, within that trembling was something I had never felt so clearly before. Freedom. In that moment, I knew the blood tie that had bound me all my life had finally fractured. I was no longer the shadow in a family built on favoritism. I was a mother, a woman, and for the first time, I was truly myself. It all unfolded like a domino effect. What had started as a Facebook post, something I thought was only a cry in the night, ended up shattering the image my parents had spent their whole lives building. I couldn't deny that a part of me felt a sharp satisfaction. Not because I wanted revenge, but because at last, the truth had been seen. For my entire life, I had been treated as the independent child, the one left outside the circle of love. But now, what I had endured was no longer a hidden secret. It had become a story the entire family, and even the wider community, had to face. That night, as I sat on my bed, I looked at Noah and Grace sleeping peacefully. Their faces were calm, unaware of the storm of judgment still raging outside. I whispered softly, I did it. I'm not silent anymore. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. My parents would surely be furious, Lauren would find new ways to mock me, and even those who supported me might eventually grow tired and drift away. But I also knew I had just cut loose a chain that had bound me for far too long. From now on, I would no longer fear being dismissed, no longer bite my tongue in silence. The truth had been spoken, and the truth carries its own power. After the storm, I learned how to close the noisy windows of social media and open smaller, quieter doors in my own life. Each morning, I drove Noah and Grace to school, pulling over by the row of maples now bare of leaves, hugging them tight and wishing them a good day. Then I headed straight to the bookstore on the avenue, where the smell of freshly roasted coffee from the corner counter and the soft chime of the bell whenever a customer pushed the door open had become the rhythm of my days. I began taking extra shifts, reorganizing the children's section, updating signs, and suggesting themed bundles like Slow Winter Nights and Small Everyday Heroes. I asked the manager if I could try a Jessica's Picks table featuring books that nurtured resilience for single parents. What I didn't expect was that customers began asking for me, wanting recommendations for their kids, then returning to say their children had finally sat down to read each night. The manager saw the steady rise in sales and smiled. "You've got an eye for this, Jess." One weekend afternoon, she pulled me into the stockroom and said plainly, "We want you to take the store manager position." I froze, feeling as if all the years of being overlooked were being soothed by that one simple acknowledgement. The new role wasn't just a different name tag on my shirt, it was the chance to create the kind of place I had always wished for as a child. A safe space for kids who loved words. I scheduled Saturday story hours, inviting parents and local teachers to participate. I set up a small round table, covered it with a checkered cloth, placed jars of pencils and stacks of blank paper, and handwrote a sign. Creative Writing Club for Teens, Wednesdays at 4:30 p.m. The first week, only 4 kids came, shyly glancing at one another. I told them, "There's no right or wrong here, only the stories in your heart." A boy nervously handed me a page about a stray cat losing its home, a girl shared about her grandmother's apple pie, and by the end, they begged the security guard to let them stay a little longer so they could finish their endings. In that moment, I knew I was doing the right thing. Word spread quickly. By the 3rd week, 10 kids showed up, then 15. The school reached out to me about making the club an official extracurricular activity. I created monthly themes teaching them to write emotion journals, to build characters out of ordinary objects, and to be brave enough to read aloud to the group. Every time a small, timid child stood up, hands shaking yet still managing to finish their piece, it felt like another stitch had been sewn into my heart, mending what had once been torn. Noah and Grace began to change too, in ways that were gentle yet strong. Noah joined the school basketball team, no longer bowing his head when borrowing an old pair of sneakers. He volunteered as a junior librarian every Thursday lunch, stacking cards and labeling books like a quiet gatekeeper of knowledge. Grace enrolled in art classes at the community center. Her first paintings were of small houses beneath a blue sky, and gradually, in the corner of her canvases, an open door appeared with steps leading into a garden. When I asked why she always drew doors, she said, "Because you told me new doors always bring new wins." Both of them joined the Riverfront Park volunteer group, picking up litter, sorting recyclables, and taping little cards that read, "Thank you for keeping the park clean," onto public trash bins. Neighbors began greeting us by name, dropping off cookies on weekends, or asking me to water their cactus pots while they were away. The threads of community, once so fragile during our early lonely days, had now woven into a warm net that held the 3 of us safely. I have a circle of friends I once called co-workers, but now I call them family. Mila at the coffee counter always makes me a sugar-free latte and slips in a waffle cookie for the kids. Sam at the literature section often hands me self-published manuscripts from local writers, saying, "Take this home to Noah, maybe he'll enjoy playing editor." On Friday nights, we take turns cooking dinner at each other's apartments, spreading tablecloths, putting on a jazz playlist, and sharing the small stories we'd gathered over the week. I tell them about the story hour where a little girl dared to change her character's ending at the last minute, and they cheer as if it were their own victory. They tell me about spilled coffee on books, or the kind-hearted customers who didn't mind waiting for a replacement. With them, I am no longer the child who had to fend for herself, no longer proving I am enough. I just sit down, scoop soup into my bowl, and know I belong. But this new path is not only about work and community, it is also about turning inward to face the dust of my childhood. I began therapy every Monday morning, after dropping the kids at school and before my shift. The small therapy room held a moss green couch, a warm yellow lamp, and a low shelf lined with teddy bears. My therapist, Alana, had a voice like a soft blanket. She didn't ask me why right away. She asked me where. Where in your body do you feel the tightness when you think of that Christmas dinner table? I placed my hand on my chest. Where do you feel the warmth when Noah says he only needs you? I rested my hand on my lower belly. Together, we learned to name emotions, to distinguish shame from guilt, to recognize when little Jessica was speaking up after being forgotten, and to teach Mother Jessica how to hold her. I practiced writing unsent letters to my mom, to my dad, to Lauren, and even to the 13-year-old girl sitting in front of a tiny birthday cake. I wrote to tell her I had abandoned her for too long, and that now I was bringing her home. One time, Alana suggested I try a small ritual. To hang a picture on my wall, not to worship the past but to mark a new beginning. I chose a photo of the three of us at the neighborhood fall festival, Noah clutching a pumpkin, Grace smiling with her toothless grin, and me with windblown hair but bright eyes. I hung it in the living room, right beside the children's bookshelf. Each time I walked by, I touched the wooden frame and whispered, "This is family." Every night before bed, I wrote down 3 lines of gratitude, thankful that Grace drew another door, that Noah dared to read a poem aloud in class, that today I sold a book set to a young mother still finding her way. These little lines were like stitches, each one threading slowly, steadily, to mend the fabric of my life. And then, from a parent's suggestion at Story Hour, I expanded the Creative Writing Club into a winter workshop series for teens. I invited a local poet to give a talk, asked the school librarian to teach us how to make handmade zines with washi tape spines and stapled edges. We organized a night called Open Mic under the fairy lights, stringing warm yellow bulbs around the reading nook, placing a small microphone on a wooden crate, and letting the kids sign up to share. The room held its breath as one boy read about a sudden move to a new home, then erupted in applause when a girl said, "I think I've forgiven my dad." Watching them, a wave of longing rose in me. How I wished someone had done this for me when I was 13. And in that very moment, I understood I was becoming that adult, not only for these children, but also for the child still living inside me. The new path also meant rebuilding boundaries. When relatives messaged me saying, "Are you okay now? Take the post down so the family can have peace," I answered simply, "I told the truth, and I stand by my decision." When my mother called, leaving voicemails filled with sighs and guilt, I stopped listening at night. Instead, I set aside a morning slot, and, if needed, I listened with Alana so I wouldn't slip back into old patterns. I learned to say no without lengthy explanations, and to say yes to the things that nourished me. On Sunday mornings, I took Noah and Grace to the riverbank with peanut butter sandwiches and a thermos of hot chocolate. We sat watching kayaks glide past, sharing 3 beautiful things from the week. Whenever the chilly wind made Grace huddle her shoulders, Noah instinctively wrapped his arm around her, while I pulled the wool scarf tighter around their necks. I tucked those small gestures deep into memory, like pressing a leaf between the pages of a book. When I received my first paycheck as a manager, I didn't buy an iPad or new shoes. I bought a small pinewood table with 3 matching chairs, and placed it by the window where the afternoon sun spilled through the curtains. On it, I set a cactus Mila had given me, a vintage desk lamp passed down from Sam, and I wrote on a chalkboard, "Our family table." That evening, we sat around it doing homework, drawing pictures, and me preparing lesson plans for Wednesday's writing group. I looked at my children, their eyes glowing in the warm light, and I smiled. I had my own table now, one we didn't need to beg a seat at. Our new path wasn't loud or dazzling, but each day it grew steadier, like frozen ground turning solid beneath our feet. And in that place, I slowly heard my own voice, soft but clear. I am enough, and so are my children. 3 years had passed since that snowy night when I took my children and walked out of my parents' house. Time hadn't erased the wounds, but it gave me the chance to rebuild life on a new foundation. And then, one December evening, as snowflakes drifted lightly over Portland, I realized that Christmas had taken on a different meaning. The small house the three of us rented after I was promoted to bookstore manager had become a true home. It wasn't spacious, and it didn't have a grassy backyard like my parents' house in Seattle, but every corner was filled with life and laughter. We decorated the living room with a Christmas tree just tall enough to reach the ceiling, bought from the local holiday market. Noah and Grace took turns hanging chipped ornaments, while I cut colored paper into snowflakes and taped them to the windows. A string of warm yellow lights wrapped around the tree, casting a gentle glow on Grace's drawings pinned to the walls. I remembered standing once in a grand living room, staring at piles of designer gifts stacked beneath a tree, my heart weighed down with heaviness. But now, just watching my children laugh and compete to hang the decorations, happiness overflowed in me. That evening, the front door kept opening and closing. Mila arrived first, carrying a box of warm ginger cookies, the sweet scent filling the house. Sam followed with a stack of hardback books wrapped in old newspaper, saying, "So the kids can tear into them without worry." Friends from the bookstore, from the writing club, from the community center all trickled in, arms full of gifts, voices humming with cheerful greetings. We put on Christmas music, spread a red and white checkered tablecloth, and set a roast turkey and a pot of vegetable soup I had made earlier right in the center. Laughter and chatter filled the air, making the little house glow as if lit from within. Noah was 13 now, taller, his voice breaking into deeper tones, but that night he eagerly led a game of charades for everyone. Grace, 10, her long hair tied with a red ribbon, stood to sing a carol while Sam strummed the guitar. I sat watching them spin through the room as friends clapped along, and I felt a rare, overwhelming gratitude. Perhaps for the first time in my life, I truly felt full, not from comparison, not from waiting on someone else's approval, but simply full. At 8 o'clock, Noah and Grace suddenly disappeared behind their bedroom door. I was surprised but didn't ask. A few minutes later, they returned, each holding a small, clumsily wrapped package. Grace handed me a crooked square box, smiling shyly. "Open it, Mom." My hands trembled as I peeled back the tape to find a bracelet made of plastic beads, mismatched in color but threaded with love. "I strung every bead myself," Grace whispered. I hadn't even wiped my tears when Noah held out a small notebook, its cover layered with star stickers. I wrote down everything from the past 3 years, since the day we left Grandma and Grandpa's house. "I want you to keep it." I pulled both of them into my arms as tears streamed down my face, not from sadness, but from joy bursting free. Those gifts, so simple, carried the very recognition I had once longed for my entire life from my parents. In that moment, the memory of 3 years ago rushed back to me. I saw myself again in my parents' grand living room, the tree glittering, extravagant gifts piled high, laughter echoing through the air. I saw Noah and Grace sitting quietly, their timid eyes fixed on presents that weren't meant for them. I saw myself silently bundling them into their coats and leading them out into the snow, leaving behind the cold stares of the entire family. The chill that night had cut through more than just skin, it had frozen inside my heart. And now, at the same time, I saw myself standing in this small living room, arms wrapped around my children, hearing the laughter of friends, Christmas lights reflecting in Grace's clear eyes. Between those two moments stretched an entire journey from being cast aside to being chosen, from pain to healing. I lifted my head and looked around. On the wall hung the photo from the autumn festival, me, Noah, and Grace smiling brightly among the pumpkins. Next to it was Grace's drawing of a small house lit from within, its door wide open, with the scribbled word, "Home." I knew then that I had stepped out of the shadows to create a family of my own, not one defined by blood, but by choice, respect, and love. As night fell, everyone gathered around the tree, each person sharing their favorite memory of the year. Mila spoke about adopting a stray cat. Sam told of selling his best friend's first book. Noah said, "My best memory is when Mom started the creative writing club, and I saw her smiling so much." Grace chimed in, "Mine is when Mom wore the bracelet I made." The room erupted in applause, and I couldn't hold back my tears. My voice shook as I said, My best memory is right now, sitting here with all of you. That Christmas night, after everyone had left, my little house grew quiet again, lit only by the soft golden glow of the tree casting flickering shadows across the walls. I sat down on the sofa and held Noah and Grace in my arms. They leaned their heads on my shoulders, eyes half closed beneath the warmth of the blanket. I took a long, steady breath, filled with a peace I hadn't known in years. And then it struck me. Maybe I need to say something not only for myself, but for those listening, for anyone who has ever felt pushed to the margins of their own family. If you have ever been treated like you are invisible in your own home, I want you to know that you are not alone. I have been there. I have stood in a room full of light and still felt like the darkness. I tried everything to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be loved the way my sister was. But the truth is, some people, even when you give them your whole heart, will still turn away. And you must understand this. You do not need to prove your worth to them. True love is not measured by gifts, whether expensive or cheap. It is measured in respect and equality. It is in the way someone listens when you speak, in the way they remember you on days that matter, in the way they recognize your presence as something irreplaceable. If you are always forced to fight for recognition, if you are constantly compared and placed lower, then that is not love. That is favoritism, that is control, and you have the right to walk away from it. I have learned that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to walk away. Walk away from the house you once called home, from the empty promises, from the eyes that never saw you as enough. The night I took my children and left my parents' house 3 Christmases ago, I had no idea what tomorrow would bring. All I knew was that I couldn't let them carry one more wound. And from that moment on, my life opened into a new path. It wasn't easy, it wasn't paved with roses, but at least it was mine, a path built by me and my children together. Be brave enough to create your own family, even if it doesn't share your blood. Family is not only where you are born, but also where you are chosen, where people truly see you and love you for who you are. For me, that is Noah, Grace, Mila, Sam, the children in the writing club, the neighbors who knock on the door to bring cookies. My real family is that circle of arms, no favoritism, no conditions, only genuine love. And then you will see. You have always been enough, from the very moment you came into this world. You don't need degrees, or money, or expensive gifts to prove it. You are enough because you can love, you can give, you can rebuild yourself from the ruins. You are enough because you can lift your head high, look in the mirror, and smile knowing, I deserve happiness. As Christmas night came to a close, I kissed Noah and Grace on the forehead and whispered softly, "Thank you for being my family." Outside the window, snow was still falling, but inside, the Christmas lights glowed brightly, reflecting off my peaceful smile. For the first time, I no longer felt the cold. I had arms to lean on, a home to return to. And that was everything I had ever wished for.